What's up, Kansas City? I'm your host, Glenn Brian Frizzell. I have a quote for you. A nation may lose its liberties and be a century in finding it out. Where is American liberty? In its far-reaching and broad sweep, slavery has stricken down the freedom of us all. Now, we could go online and we could check out who actually made that statement. We'll find that it's Mr. John Mercer Langston. Today marks the anniversary of his death, November 15th, 1897. He was an American abolitionist, attorney, educator, activist, and politician, also the first dean of the law school at Howard University. That brings me to today's guest. Today we have with us a special guest who, give him your name?
Taylor Fields.
Mr. Fields, who is an attorney with
Fields and Brown.
Fields and Brown, which I just learned is a minority-owned, ethnically diverse firm whose members bring over 100 years of combined litigation experience. What kind of law do you practice?
Well, our litigation practices in primarily 4 areas: employment law, insurance defense, workers' compensation, and commercial litigation.
Wow, sounds exciting. Can you tell us a little bit how that relates to Kansas City? What kind of clients do you normally represent?
Well, our practice has been primarily on the defense side, which means that our clients have been mostly in the corporate area. My practice has been in the 2 areas of employment law, which is employment discrimination law, and also in commercial litigation.
Mr. Fields, I have a little bit about your educational background. You were admitted to the bar in Missouri in 1971. You went to the University of Missouri, Kansas City, University of Missouri, Columbia, is that correct?
That's correct.
That is over 40 years of experience.
Yes, sir, it is.
Now, Sam Cooke had a song out earlier than that called "A Change Is Going to Come." I was born in the 80s and, was drilled into you at school, Brown versus Board of Education, Little Rock, Arkansas. These were events. These were that culminated in having more opportunities for us. But there are still some problems going on in the community. What changes have you seen in your field, and what changes would you like to see in the next 20 or 30 years?
Well, there have been a number. The changes have been very dramatic in the practice of law. One of the things that's impacted the practice of law, the change in the practice, has been the use of the electronic media. That has actually really turned the practice of law around. It has made small firms very, very competitive with large firms. I mean, being able to access information as quickly as we can, and the utilization of computers in courtrooms, and being able to get background data on jurors, on all kinds of information. It's really revolutionized the practice of law.
Okay, that brings us to Kansas City Star article, and I'm gonna come back to that point in just a minute. America's personal data is shared with CIA, IRS, and others in Security Pro. What role do you see your field, the law field, playing in making sure that our security data for people who have social media devices aren't sold? I don't want to walk down the street and text message a message to my girlfriend, and then 2-3 days later my boss knows what I said to her. What kind of stuff are you doing to protect it?
I think you've touched on it, and that is one of the most prized rights in America is the right to privacy. And given the advancements in electronics and information, the proliferation of information about people, once you put your name into the system, it tracks you, and people know so much more about you. But we have to balance the need for information against the right of individuals to privacy. And there will be a lot of litigation spawned out of that tension between the right to privacy and the right to want to know. Of course, the public today demands transparency in government, in business, in all areas. But aside from that, there is also the right to privacy, the individual's right to privacy, and the tension between those two, I think, has and will continue to spawn litigation in the future.
Mr. Fields, I guess this leads more to the area of civil rights. Social media, and again, you're from the old school. I hope I don't offend you by saying
No,
that.
that's all
The
right.
social media, does that interfere with the good old-fashioned contact, one-on-one contact, where you see people organizing Wall Street, you see people organizing Liberty Memorial, but do we just go home afterwards and turn on our social media devices and call it a night? Is it still that interaction going on?
I guess it's kind of a double-edged sword in this sense that the right of association is something that has, again, is a fundamental right that has always been protected. But by the same token, again, by the introduction of information into the social media, people know more about other individuals' interests. And the social media is obviously it is the medium of communication and how people exchange ideas, talk to one another, establish commonalities, and all of those things affect social organizations like the growth of the NAACP, like the growth of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, National Action Network. People in various areas of the country can communicate with one another, establish commonalities, establish goals. The organization of that and putting that together is a great challenge, but it's also can be very rewarding on one hand, and on the other hand, it is a challenge to individual liberty.
Individual liberty. You mentioned a statement that I'm gonna have to rewind a little later after this is through to get when we talked about our first role. Excuse me if I call you Mr. Taylor. I had
That's quite all
a
right.
vice principal named Mr. Taylor when I was younger,
Okay.
and I spent more time in his office. So you think I would know something? But Mr. Fields, what do you think about the president? Is he in hot water with the? Can you offer rebuttal for his critics who are saying that his approval rating is at its lowest? Comparing that to President Bush's approval rating in Hurricane Katrina, he's not going to recover even if the website with healthcare manages to rebound.
No, I think a lot of that is political theater that's going on. I think that he will the website will be corrected. It will be up and running. But underneath the surface there, that criticism of the president and the criticism of the Attorney General, I just noticed the other day that there is a movement in the House of Representatives to impeach him. Underneath a lot of that is, I think, a racial overtones involved in that. I mean, the criticism of the president, the fact that I think it's unprecedented that the day he was first inaugurated, there are people on the other side of town meeting to decide how to discredit his presidency. All of that is feeding into, I think, the criticisms of him. I think the whole notion of health care, I think, is going to be implemented. I think people will accept it once they understand the Affordable Care Act and the benefits that it provides to them. I believe that it will be accepted by Americans. But what you see now, you have to kind of look past. A lot of it is political theater, and a lot of it will pass.
What's up, Kansas City? So far we talked about right to privacy. We talked a little bit about the president and his challenges. We will have more information for you in regards to healthcare. We do want to provide an active link for those of you who are not participating or for some reason have not been able to get through to the website. However, Mr. Fields, first off, I'd like to say that's a nice tie.
Thank you.
Blue is one of my favorite colors.
Thank you.
Can you tell us why you decided to go into law? Give us a little bit about your background.
That's a story that I sometimes share with young people. I started at the University of Missouri in chemical engineering. That was my undergraduate major. And just dating myself, as I was going into college, of course, there was a lot of emphasis on the physical sciences. America was really getting into space exploration, and the call was that this was a great future. I wasn't sure that I was going to be able, because of my economic circumstances. My parents grew up in the rural South, and I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to get past the undergraduate level. So I thought I would select a a profession that I thought would be good to me economically and rewarding. And so I went into chemical engineering. And it's kind of a long story, but one day I was sitting in the stacks at the University of Missouri in the library, and I was working on a math problem, I remember. And I remember it was getting the best of me. And so I got up and I was going over to Jesse Hall, which is the administration building, to see if my financial aid fund check had come in. And I was wearing an old sweatshirt and some jeans with a hole in the knee. And I remember that I walked down to the end of the block, and you had to go down underneath the street and come up on the other side. And between Jesse Hall and where I came up on the other side is the law school. Now, I had been at the University of Missouri 4 years, and I had never, ever been in that building. And to this very day, I cannot tell you why on that particular day I decided that I was going to cut through the law school to get to Jesse Hall. But as I went into that law school, I saw a notice on the bulletin board, and it said Julian Bond to speak. And when I looked up on that, I noticed that the date that he was supposed to speak was that very day. And I looked at the time, and it was about 30 minutes later from the time I looked at the board. So I went into Jesse Hall, and I looked, and I didn't have my financial check. So I decided to walk back through the law school, and I saw all of these well-dressed white students, law students, walking toward an auditorium. And as I said, I remember I had on an old sweatshirt, and I had on these jeans, and I was embarrassed. But I remember going into the back of that auditorium, and I was in the very last row, and I kind of slid down in my seat to be inconspicuous. And Julian Bond came out, and he began to talk. And I remember that he was having trouble being seated in the Georgia legislature at the time. And he had just, he was very active in SNCC, and I think I'd read about him in the Ebony magazine, and maybe it was Time magazine, I don't remember. But I remember reading articles on his efforts in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And I remember he stood up and he talked to the law students about, and I remember him saying that he hoped that they would be better lawyers than the lawyers that were trying to keep him from being seated in the Georgia legislature. He was the first African American to be a Georgia legislator. And his talk, in that talk, he talked about how important lawyers were going to be in the civil rights movement in the 60s and 70s, and the role that they would play. And I was really inspired by that. And as I left, I kind of hurried out after he got to the end of his speech. And I remember looking up on the bulletin board, and it said LSAT exam to be given, and that it was about two weeks in the future, and it didn't cost that much at that time. And I remember going into the dean's office and paying for it, and the rest is history.
Wow. First off, I want to say that's a very inspirational story. Julian Bond, I've read a little bit about him. He was in Kansas City for the NAACP convention not too long ago. I didn't know, Mr. Fields, that you could just walk in and take the LSAT.
Well, you had to sign up for it, and the date that it was going to be given was about 3 weeks after that date. And so I paid the money, and that's another story. I am a member of a fraternity, Kappa Alpha Psi, and on that, it was to be given on a Saturday morning. And I remember that we used to go over on Saturday mornings at Brewer Fieldhouse and play basketball. And if you win, you stay on the court and you keep playing. Well, I remember that morning, they only had 4 brothers that were back at the fraternity house, and they were headed over, and they wanted me to go play. And I said to myself, well, do I really want to go take this test, or do I really want to go play basketball? Fortunately, as an act of fate, one of the other brothers came back from a lab and joined, and so I decided, well, since they had 5 guys, I'll just go over and take this test. And so I went over and I took the exam.
Wow, that must have been a pretty magical bulletin board there, Mr. Field. Can you tell us a little bit about the law that you practice? I kind of want to lead that into starting your own law firm, because it's not just any law firm. You're on 11th and Main Street, and again, you're the oldest, largest minority-owned law firm, your website says, in the Kansas City metropolitan area. Yeah. Now, I know from law, when I watch law on TV, I'm looking at Law and Order, I'm looking at The Practice, I'm looking at Soldier Story, Cosby Show. These are TV shows that have characters written in Are these realistic portrayals of what you actually do and
Well,
starting your own firm?
I'm not sure how much they relate to what I do. As I said, my practice has been primarily in the area of employment law. One thing I can say is that the practice of law has been rewarding for us. I have had the opportunity to meet a lot of people. One of the things that's kind of, I guess, going back years, a little bit unique to our practice is that we wanted to build a corporate practice. And that was something that was kind of unheard of in the days when I first started. I mean, the practice of law for African American attorneys when I first came out was primarily doing criminal defense work, domestic relations work, probate work, and personal injury plaintiffs work. And it was rare to have a major client like Bank of America or Walmart or General Motors, who happen to be some of our clients today. It was very rare to have those businesses as clients during that time. And the challenge for us was to go out and really to try to build a practice and get your foot in the door in those kinds of institutions. But there have been a number of organizations that have helped along the way. The National Bar Association, which is the oldest and largest national association of African American lawyers, they have a section that was called a commercial law section that was designed to introduce African American lawyers to large corporations. And we would go to various conferences around the country, and general counsels from large corporations that wanted to diversify their representation would interview law firms, and they would interview our firms, and that's basically how we kind of got our foot in the door. And now we do more marketing ourselves at various professional association meetings. I imagine that we probably are out of the office maybe a dozen times a year at various places throughout the United States. Meeting with potential clients and matters, and that's kind of how we kind of build the practice. It's still a struggle. It's still not. The competition is very stiff. The large law firms don't like to give up those clients, and when you get your foot in the door, you really have to perform, because if you don't stay there very long.
Performance. Wow. So you really did learn something in that law school. I'm not saying that facetiously. I would like to kind of probe a little bit, if you don't mind. I know we don't have too much more time. Do you get back to the law school? Do you see and mentor the younger lawyers coming up? Is there kind of a fraternity, would you say, of lawyers in the community?
Yes. Of course, there's a local bar association, but I serve on the Alumni Association of the University of Missouri Kansas City School of Law. And fortunately, a lot of times the students, the Black American Law Students Association, BALSA, I have been invited from time to time to speak in various programs at the law school. I know that there is an active Federalist Society group, which is a very conservative group, and sometimes they'll have someone to come in and speak, and I've been invited to come in and speak on the opposite side of a particular question, which I enjoy the give and take of that. Talking about certain Supreme Court cases. I know most recently I was out at the law school, and the subject matter was the most recent Supreme Court case out of the University of Texas that struck down the admissions policy at the University of Texas, and discussing the one at the University of Michigan as well. But those are. I really enjoy the opportunity to have that exchange with young people in law school. Yes.
You have written I guess you would say a paper, for lack of a better word, about the disparities in local government contracts that was presented to the State of Black Kansas City Urban League of Greater Kansas City in 2002. Are you well versed on this issue? Is this something that we should worry about when we
That's a long time ago.
Handing out money?
Well, that was a long time ago. One of the areas, kind of a boutique area that our law firm is involved in, is in disparity studies, and those are studies that are conducted by governmental agencies, such as a state government, city government, And it's to determine whether there is a need for remedial action as far as contracting is concerned. That is, if there's a disparity, a racial disparity or ethnic disparity in the contracting between contracts that are let by those governmental agencies.
I have one last question here. I read somewhere that you also work in bankruptcy and reforming bankruptcy. I was listening to Marion Wright. Is that true? First off,
well, our firm has worked in bankruptcy. I don't do a lot personally anymore in that.
In that particular area,
Right.
Okay, I'll save that particular question. Well, we'd like to thank you, Mr. Fields, for coming out here today and speaking with us. Your story is rich. I'm surprised you haven't written a book yet. If you do, make sure that we do get a copy, and we do want to invite you back to speak with us. What's up, Kansas City? I am your host, Glenn Brian Frizzell. Thank you for taking out time and tuning in today. Check out more video online at www.whatsupkansascity.net. And remember, the sky's the limit. Why not shoot for the moon? If you don't make it, at the very least, you can say you landed among the stars. Till next time, thank you.
CMG wants you to always remember, the victory we call success goes to the best prepared. When you invest in your community, you're really just investing in yourself. Thanks.